The Case of Cynthia Crane, The Forgotten Pursuit. September 15, 1994, started as just another ordinary, sweltering late summer day in Conway, Arkansas, a city known for its blue-collar work ethic and close-knit communities. But beneath the surface, in the shadows of a decaying urban neighborhood on the edge of town, a story was beginning to unfold that no one would forget. It was the day Cynthia Crane, a 42-year-old sanitation worker, decided to take revenge on the world. The neighborhood where Cynthia lived was the kind of place where windows were barred, streetlights flickered, and no one walked outside after sunset. Drugs, violence, and poverty had transformed this once bustling area into a grim reflection of its former self. Cynthia, though outwardly quiet and unassuming, had become an unwilling product of that environment. Every day she would drive her trash truck through those streets, collecting garbage and staring out at the broken world around her. Over time, the rage inside her began to grow, festering into something dark and uncontrollable. September 15th, 1994, the beginning of the end. It all started on the morning of September 15th. Cynthia had been harboring a deep grudge against one of her co-workers, Robert Bobby Fisher, a 26-year-old mechanic who had worked for the city for 3 years. Bobby was young, brash, and, in Cynthia's mind, disrespectful. He had once made an offhand comment about how she drove that garbage truck like she belonged in it. The insult had stayed with her, replaying over and over in her mind, eating away at her sanity. That day, she was driving her trash truck through the urban jungle, the massive vehicle rumbling over potholes and cracked pavement, the scent of rotting refuse hanging in the air. Bobby was working in the garage that day, and she knew it. But Cynthia didn't want to confront him in a quiet corner of the garage. She wanted something bigger, more final. As her shift ended, she didn't return the truck like she was supposed to. Instead, she waited outside the garage, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. When Bobby stepped outside to leave for the day, Cynthia saw her moment. She floored the gas pedal, the trash truck lurching forward with a deafening roar. Bobby turned just in time to see the hulking metal beast barreling toward him, but it was too late. The truck slammed into him with brutal force, his body crumpling under the weight of the machine. The impact was so intense that Bobby's body was dragged for several feet, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. Cynthia didn't stop. She drove over his body again, making sure he was dead, before speeding away from the scene, her mind racing. She didn't look back. To her, Bobby was just garbage, another piece of refuse to be disposed of. The high-speed pursuit. As Cynthia fled, the sound of police sirens began to fill the air. Just blocks away, an unrelated high-speed pursuit was unfolding. A drug dealer being chased by officers through the tight, labyrinthine streets of Conway. It was pure chaos. The police were focused on catching their suspect, unaware that another crime had just been committed. The pursuit tore through the city, drawing all available units toward the chase. It was the perfect distraction for Cynthia. As the drug dealer led the police on a wild ride through the city's inner streets, Cynthia used the confusion to her advantage, steering her truck toward a remote part of the city where she knew no one would look for her. In the chaos, no one noticed the battered trash truck weaving through side streets and alleyways, bloodstains still smeared on its front bumper. Cynthia had gotten away, at least for now. The second murder, a neighborhood's nightmare. In the weeks that followed, the murder of Bobby Fisher was plastered across the local news, but with no immediate leads, the case went cold. Cynthia went back to work, driving the same trash truck through the same streets, her co-workers none the wiser. But she wasn't done. The thrill of killing had awakened something inside her, a hunger she could no longer control. Her next victim would be another resident of the neighborhood, a man named Terry Holt, a 37-year-old former construction worker who had recently fallen on hard times. Terry had crossed Cynthia once before. He had complained to the city about her driving too fast down their narrow street, nearly hitting his dog one afternoon. It was a petty grievance, but in Cynthia's mind, it was enough to warrant death. One evening, after a long, uneventful shift, Cynthia spotted Terry walking home from the corner store, carrying a bag of groceries. The streets were quiet, the only sounds being the distant wail of sirens and the occasional barking of a stray dog. She didn't hesitate. Like with Bobby, she revved the engine and sped toward Terry, who was oblivious to the approaching danger. The trash truck's headlights illuminated his figure just before it plowed into him, the force sending his body flying into the side of a nearby building. Terry was still alive, barely, but Cynthia didn't care. She backed up and ran over him again, crushing his ribs beneath the massive wheels of the truck. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the night, leaving the mangled body behind for the morning to find. The police were baffled. Two brutal hit-and-runs in the same neighborhood, both involving the same kind of vehicle, yet no solid leads. The residents of Conway were terrified, especially those in Cynthia's part of town. They began locking their doors at night, avoiding the streets unless absolutely necessary, but no one suspected the quiet woman behind the wheel of the city's trash truck. 2017, the case cracks open. For years, the murders of Bobby Fischer and Terry Holt remained unsolved. Cynthia had managed to evade justice, continuing to work her job, unnoticed by the world around her. But in 2017, everything changed. DNA evidence had advanced significantly in the decades since the murders, and a new forensic team was reviewing cold cases across Arkansas. When they revisited the scene of Bobby Fischer's death, they found something they hadn't before: tiny fibers from the seat of Cynthia's trash truck. Fibers that had been embedded in Bobby's clothing when his body had been dragged under the truck. The fibers, combined with new eyewitness reports from 1994 that had been previously overlooked, painted a clearer picture. Cynthia Crane became the prime suspect in both murders. A warrant was issued for her arrest. The final confrontation, on the evening of December 14, 2017, police arrived at Cynthia's small rundown home in the same dilapidated neighborhood where she had committed her brutal crimes. She was now in her 60s, a grizzled shell of the woman she had once been, but still sharp and dangerous. As the officers knocked on the door, Cynthia didn't answer at first. Instead, she quietly walked to the fireplace where a roaring fire was burning. Next to it was an old, blackened fireplace poker. When the police finally broke down the door, Cynthia swung the poker with all her strength at the first officer who entered. The burning metal connected with his arm, searing the flesh and sending him to the ground in agony. She swung again, aiming for his head, but another officer tackled her before she could land the fatal blow. In the struggle, the poker clattered to the floor, and Cynthia was finally subdued. Her eyes were wild, filled with the same rage that had driven her to kill all those years ago. Even as they handcuffed her, she didn't seem afraid. In her mind, she had already won. The aftermath: Cynthia Crane was sentenced to life in prison for the murders of Bobby Fischer and Terry Holt. During her trial, she remained unrepentant, never once showing remorse for her actions. She claimed the world had wronged her, that she had been pushed to the edge and had simply fought back the only way she knew how. The urban neighborhood where she had committed her crimes never fully recovered from the horror of what had happened. To this day, the residents of Conway still speak in hushed tones about the trash truck killer, the quiet woman who had terrorized their streets and gotten away with it for over 2 decades. And every September 15th, the memory of Cynthia Crane and the brutality she unleashed still lingers, like a ghost haunting the streets of that decaying part of town.